to our, just like to announce that we will start in a couple of minutes because the previous session took a little longer than scheduled, and so people are just getting a little food and drink, but we will start in the next couple of minutes. So stay online, and we'll be with you, Gonzalez, and CSTD Secretariat, and I will be facilitating this session. We will start this discussion with some introductory remarks by the two co-organizers of the event, UNTAD and the International Federation of Information Processing. So first, we will hear the remarks from my colleague and my director, Mrs. Shamika Sirimane, who is the director of the Division on Technology and Logistics. Shamika, please.
Thank you, Angel. I have a very nicely written speech, but I thought I'll, shorten it so that we get you to talk more. I mean, we all know with the ChatGPT and then text to visual AI tools that have been making rounds recently, AI is at top of everyone's mind. It's in news. We talk about it. We go and ask questions from ChatGPT. But what it also shows is that we are at the beginning of a technological revolution that will have profound effect on all aspects of our lives. It will change the way we, educate ourselves, get healthcare, with transportation. I mean, basically the way we form opinions. It's all going to change. So at the CSTD, I mean, as you all know, for the longest time, our preoccupation has been on how do we make sure that these frontier technologies work for the good of the world? How do we make sure that this round of technological revolution will not, leave developing countries far behind? And that will open a huge void that may not be able to fill. So those are the preoccupations of the CSTD, as you all know. So with this in mind, I'd like to pose two questions to our esteemed panel of experts. First, is it ethical and equitable to allow AI to have an increasing role in managing global systems, given that AI is being developed in data sets and contexts that mostly leave out the people, the economies, the cultures of developing countries? So I know it's a difficult question, but I like to put that to you, the experts, to delve into this. And we all know that in the absence of an effective international normative framework, most developing countries are left without alternatives for AI regulation other than adopting frameworks developed by others. In this regard, my second question, I think we started to talk about this, Anthony, a while ago, is whether an open innovation approach for AI can offer an alternative model more amenable to the ethical and equitable imperatives that matter for developing countries. So let me just put these, difficult questions to you and hand over to our moderator to take us forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Shamika. And now we will hear the introductory remarks from Anthony Wong, who is the president of the International Federation of Information Processing, which is probably the biggest professional association in the ICT world. Mr. Wong, please.
Moderator, thank you, Shamika. Thank you to UNTAC and the Secretary to the Commission and the Vice Chair of the Commission for your invitation to co-host this event today. I'm very pleased to be here as the President of the IFIP, the International Federation for Information Processing. If I may, I'd like to start with just a quick introduction of IFIP. IFIP was founded by UNESCO more than 60 years ago, and its mission is about worldwide professionalism and social responsible development and deployment of ICT. So you can see for this very simple mission statement how important this issue is today. So I'm very pleased to co-host this session on implications of AI with UNTAC and the Commission. But I'd also like to acknowledge the ambassadors and distinguished ministers, ladies and gentlemen who are here today, and also all the online participants. I believe there are more than 60 online who's tapping into this session online. So I think this agenda is very important. not only because of ChatGPT and generative AI, which in the last few months have turned the world upside down. There are many issues that we need to look at, and I'm hoping this will be a start of our partnership with UNTAG and the world on this many issues covering AI, ChatGPT, and other generative artificial intelligence models. So thank you for the invitation, and I look forward to participate in the session.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. Our first panelist is Cedric Washholz, who is the Chief of the Digital Innovation and Transformation section of UNESCO. And as we all know, UNESCO is doing extremely important work on artificial intelligence, so we're all very eager to hear what he has to say. Cedric, the floor is yours.
Thank you to our friends from the CSTD, to Angel and Shamika, for inviting UNESCO to join this session on the multifaceted implications of AI. As many of you know, UNESCO is a specialized agency in the fields of education, in the fields of science, natural and human sciences, in culture, and also communication and information. And in all these 5 fields of competence, we are integrating AI, and we're doing standard setting work, capacity development work, policy work in this domain, and of course, also facilitating international cooperation. Now, this is an exciting topic for all of us, but I was a little bit astonished to hear, and I think it reflects on a lack of communication we have been doing in UNESCO, and to read in the concept note the beginning, which says, and Shamika just repeated, in the absence of an effective international normative framework, because we spent 3 years in bringing international experts together and doing multi-stakeholder consultations, and have then the only ethical framework on AI adopted by all our member states, and that was in 2021. And since then, we have been implementing this normative framework and developing different tools. And of course, you're absolutely right in highlighting how ChatGPT and other tools have just brought all the ethical concerns and ethical discussions to the forefront of the international, not only cooperation work, but on everybody's mind, and often computers too. And just 2 weeks ago, we launched a new publication on AI and the missing links. It's about AI governance. And we had 2 of the AI superstars contributing to this publication. Joshua Bengio, who is something like a Nobel Prize winner, the Turing Prize winner in Nobel, but also Professor Crawford, who were there on the panel discussing and launching this publication. And I was a little shocked to hear that they hadn't foreseen this kind of development either. So they're at the heart of AI development and AI developers, and they didn't see ChatGPT and the 3rd and now 4th version coming. And that is, of course, a little bit of a shock to everybody. I think those who have used the tools have understood that this will change part of the white-collar work quite rapidly. And we know also that it is being integrated by one of the sponsors, Microsoft, into different tools quite rapidly. And no other tools have been adopted at that pace at such a broad range. So of course, ChatGPT, but other AI users raise considerable ethical concerns, and we have developed some readiness assessment methodologies, ethical impact assessment tools, which were not used, I have to say, before launching that product. But of course, the concerns are deeply rooted in the principles laid down by UNESCO, which relate to human rights, to human agency and autonomy, to transparency, to accountability, to privacy, security, diversity, and non-discrimination, to environmental sustainability, and in the end also to promotion of peace. I could go into the depths of every of these aspects relating to ChatGPT, but I leave some room for discussion and to come in on that later too. But it is, of course, an exciting and important topic. Now, I want to briefly speak about another dimension which we should address in this context, which is, of course, there is the call for governance, for regulation in some areas. Some governments ask for a regulation, but also some private sector companies and some civil society organization ask for a regulation because one can see some of the risks. Some of you might have read, for example, in a New York Times article just this weekend about the right-wing GPT. Which has been quoted a lot, and where it showed that for about $300 you can put on top or layer on of ChatGPT something which will then generate more right-wing answers. So you can imagine to which extent this can generate disinformation, but also emphasize conflicts in societies and this polarization which we have been witnessing before already. Now, the second point I wanted to come to is, of course, this governance, AI governance challenges, and there are what UNESCO is doing in this domain too. And that is based on a needs assessment we did. We started in Africa, but then extended it to other parts, to 6 countries on AI needs assessment. And in our UNESCO domain, the strongest needs were for capacity and policy development. So creating enabling environments which both address or harness the opportunities and address the risk of using AI technologies and specific strategies, and building capacities for policymakers in the domain was the highest priority set by these African countries who responded to our survey. 32 countries responded to our survey. So we developed on the basis of that a competency framework and also capacity development initiatives in this domain. A third dimension I wanted to just briefly, and I can go into more depth in any of these if you want to mention is our work on AI and the rule of law. That is because it's not only ethics which are important, but it is also the question of decisions by judicial operators and the human rights. And we have launched in last year a course, a MOOC on and also face-to-face and online exchanges. And the MOOC was taken in the first year by 4,500 operational judicial operators in 138 countries, including Supreme Court judges, so on all levels. And that shows just the need in this domain too for judges and the interest in knowing and learning more on the impact of AI and what it has for consequences in the jurisdiction area. So I have more, much more, but I want to keep it short and leave some room for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Cedric. I think Mr. Wong wants to comment on some of your points.
Not only was IFIP founded by UNESCO, I'm very glad to mention that we are involved with a number of AI work with UNESCO already. So we're helping you review the AI toolkit for judicial officers as we speak. The deadline, I was told, is next month. So we have a number of IT and lawyer-based people in IFIP who will be contributing to that work. We also been starting dialogue with you on the ethical impact assessments for the recommendation that was passed last year. So congratulations for that work, and also for your work on disinformation. Recently, you host a major summit in Paris on that. So I think all that adds to the relevancy of this topic because it's very big. My forte, which is in the opinion piece that I've written for the commission recently, is on copyright, which I mentioned towards during the discussion, because I think it's a very important matter that we need to debate and consider about the use of copyright material to train ChatGPT and many generative models. So thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Mr. Wong. I would like to perhaps excuse ourselves for the terminology used in the concept note because it was drafted by ChatGPT. So any mistakes that you find in the concept note are not attributed to us. Actually, there's an interesting discussion about what is really a normative framework, what is a legally binding document, what are guiding principles. That could be an interesting and what are effective mechanisms for governance of artificial intelligence. But I would like to go on with our agenda. And our next speaker is Mr. Juntao Wang, who is Deputy Chief Engineer of Cloud Computing and Big Data in the Institute of the China Academy of Information and Communication Technology. And he's also the Vice Chair of the ITU-T Focus Group on the Metaverse. Mr. Wang, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Juntao Wang from China, CSTD, and my presentation today will be trustworthy AI framework and best practices. So first, I think we need to figure out what the problem is here. AI technology is evolving with vertical industries rapidly, where we are harnessing more and more from AI-enabled applications. We are also encountering more and more severe issues caused by AI. Negative news are more and more frequent these days. For example, it is reported that 90% of Tesla accidents are caused by loss of control. And fake glasses could successfully unlock 19 phones. And deepfake videos blurs the line between truth and false. And AI trust issues continues to emerge and are even becoming more and more fierce. So how to make AI technologies trusted by users has become the key priority all over the world. International organizations, governments, and companies are working closely and hard to find a way to make AI trustworthy. By analyzing relevant 84 global published policy documents, we found that 5 keywords could be the main pillar of trustworthy AI. And they are transparency, security, fairness, accountability, and privacy protection. And now it has already reached a consensus globally that trustworthy AI is playing the key role in guiding the industries to make AI for good. So, however, we have found that most of the trustworthy AI has become empty talk. People can talk about it for hours, but the industry doesn't even have a clue on how to get it done. Some scholars believe that AI principles has become a means of moral whitewashing in some companies, and those companies practically did nothing except for decorating their products by fancy words, such as trustworthy AI. And most of the programmers still believe that it is not their job to solve ethical issues. And some face recognition applications even take a picture of the whole body of end users to collect more data without even a notice. So experts warn users to put on clothes before doing face recognitions. We need to put trustworthy AI into practice to stop all of those kind of accidents to happen. So the 5 key pillars are not enough. We did a little bit more work to convert the 5 trustworthy features to technologies and actions, which the companies should always do during the full life cycle of AI products and services. Technologies such as interoperability technology, privacy protection technology need to be implemented. And enterprises not only have to integrate those technologies into production cycles, they also have to establish management mechanism and cultivate corporate culture for the implementation of the 5 trustworthy features. Also, enterprises' involvement is not enough. The whole industry has to work together to carry out assessment of evaluation of trustworthy AI. Standards need to be developed to make sure everyone is operating in a trusted way. So in this slide, I just want to elaborate a little bit more on the key technologies that trustworthy AI will be utilizing. They are stability, which means the ability of the AI system to resist malicious attacks. Interpretability, which means that the decisions made by an AI system need to be understandable to humans. Privacy protection, which means the AI system cannot divulge private information of individuals or groups. Fairness, which means AI should treat all users fairly. Technologies need to be implemented within the full life cycle of artificial intelligence technologies, products, and services. For planning and design phase, it is required to list the full trustworthy design requirements for AI systems. For research and development testing, it is required to carry out trustworthy technology use and testing. For the operation phase, it still needs continuous monitoring to make sure bad things never happens or minimize the loss caused by AI. Below, I gave 2 examples on how to implement AI trustworthy into practice. The first example is for recommendation algorithms. The main work is for the operation phase, which is composed of process and afterward steps. For recommendation algorithms, the process step is composed of user interaction, intervention mechanism, and the afterward step is composed of emergency handling. For the user interaction mechanism of the recommendation algorithm, we need to make sure that business processes for user interaction meet governance requirements, and it involves with the user's right to know and decide data compliance, storage classification, encryption, security, implement intervention mechanisms such as deweighting and breakup, and build a complaint mechanism and feedback channels. In user interaction, requirements such as personal empowerment, algorithm transparency, and algorithm interpretation should be fully implemented. Meanwhile, records such as user behavior logs, material logs, and recommendation logs should be kept to implement algorithms review requirements. And in the intervention mechanism step, it is required to model the user's negative feedback data to reduce the appearance of content users don't like. It is required to build a discovery recommendation link to enhance the diversity of the recommendation system. And in the emergency handling step, it is required to conduct full link unbiased learning that portraying users' diverse interest distribution. And the second example is deep synthesis algorithm. And in the R&D phase, it is mainly the algorithm provider's duty to build explicit and implicit technical capabilities at least 2 levels. Given that deep synthesis technology has reached a very realistic effect, it is difficult to identify by the naked eye without a priori information. Therefore, companies should intervene beforehand and manage at the source. Adding logos at the explicit level helps users to identify the authenticity of information, and embedding word marks at the implicit level helps regulators to trace the source afterwards. For the operation phase, it is the algorithm user's duty to implement of algorithm mark at the intervention mechanism step to protect the user's right to know. As the application side of the algorithm, the relevant platform should clearly mark the synthetic video to protect the user's right to know. And in addition, potential synthetic videos should be further identified through technologies such as digital watermarking, confrontation samples, and multimodal recognition. And at the data level of the deep synthetic algorithms, multi-level and all-round screening and inspection should be carried out before and after the application is launched. And the content security should be guaranteed through continuous supervision. Before the application goes live, the material data is required to be screened in two ways, filtering undesired information on the one hand and private data on the other. After the application goes live, the data is continuously tracked and inspected in real time to ensure content security. For example, digital watermarking technologies are implemented to ensure the interceptability, robustness, and security. Due to time limitations, I cannot elaborate more on those. And maybe some of the sentences sounds a little bit confusing at this moment, but to implement trustworthy technologies to the full life cycle of AI services is really a hard and challenging work. So we're expecting experts all over the world to work together to make sure that AI is for good. And thank you, and this concludes my today's presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wang. I, for one, have to say that I'm not sure I understood everything that was in your presentation, but at least it's reassuring to know that the same technology that can create these uncertainties is also able to provide some solutions to make reliable and trustworthy artificial intelligence. Our next speaker is Mrs. Highwater Tesfaye. She's a technical advisor at the Office of Responsible Artificial Intelligence of Microsoft, and she's also an expert in data analysis and statistical modeling. Mrs. Tesfaye, please.
Thank you all very much. I'm going to pull up my presentation in just a second. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Hiwat Tesfaye, and as mentioned, I am a technical advisor in Microsoft's Office of Responsible AI, and it's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you all today to talk about this very important topic. So I want to share with you some opening remarks before we get into Microsoft's approach to responsible AI. AI systems have been making their way into everyday life over the last few decades, with a marked acceleration over the last couple of years, and especially over the last couple of months with the emergence of generative AI systems. We find AI in the algorithms used to rank our search results online, to recommend movies on Netflix and songs on Spotify, to unlock our phones using our face with facial recognition technology, and to complete our sentences in email. The hope for AI is that it will make our lives more productive, creative, convenient, and entertaining. AI is also finding its way into just about every industry in the world, supporting critical decisions that may impact the trajectory of people's lives. We have seen countless headlines of AI systems that enhance the human potential, and we have also seen many headlines of AI gone wrong, which further emphasizes the need to take a measured and principled approach to the development and use of AI systems. And I think this concept is well articulated in this quote from a book called Tools and Weapons by Brad Smith and Carol Ann Brown. Brad Smith is Microsoft's president, and this book was published in 2019. The quote reads, "When your technology changes the world, you bear a responsibility to help address the world that you have helped create." And this is sort of the underlying tone behind Microsoft's approach to responsible AI. So let's get into it. We've been on this journey of responsible AI for a little while now. Over about 6 years ago, our CEO, Satya Nadella, penned an article in Slate magazine detailing out the sort of first concepts of our responsible AI principles. And since then, there have been some notable milestones along the way. with the establishment of key teams within Microsoft to drive this work and the publication of our responsible AI standard in the summer of 2022. But it's important to note that our journey hasn't been perfectly linear, as this diagram may indicate. There have been curves and loops along the way, which serves as a reminder to stay humble about the journey that is ahead of us. For those that may not be aware, these are the 6 responsible AI principles that Microsoft has established, and similar to the presentation that we just listened to by Yun Tao, there are entities, government entities, non-government entities, private sector entities that have established similar principles. So there seems to be a convergence around these concepts of fairness, reliability and safety, privacy and security, inclusiveness, and some foundational principles around transparency and accountability. When we're faced with and contending with challenging, complex AI systems, we at Microsoft find ourselves coming back to these principles time and again, and they continue to be our North Star. However, principles alone are not enough, and this is the same sort of message we heard in the last presentation as well, and I wholeheartedly agree. Principles ultimately are not self-executing. It doesn't matter how much we desire or believe that an AI system should be fair or inclusive. That doesn't make it so. There needs to be actual practical steps that need to be taken. Principles are also open to interpretation. So if I were to ask a cohort of you all to provide a definition for what it means to be accountable or fair, we may get very diverse definitions for that, interpretations for that. And lastly, principles are incapable of answering the question of how. We say our AI systems need to be transparent and inclusive and fair and so on, but how does that actually translate in the practical sense by engineering teams? So to further articulate this, Microsoft takes a multifaceted approach to operationalize principles at scale, and we focus on 4 key areas. At the foundation, there is a governance structure to enable progress and accountability. Right above that, we have rules to standardize our responsible AI requirements. I alluded to this. It's called our responsible AI standard, and I'll talk about it as well in just a second. Above that, we have training and practices to promote a human-centered mindset by the engineering teams that are developing these systems. And finally, tools and processes for implementation. So in the interest of time, I'll cover these last 2, governance at the foundation and the rules above it. Our governance structure at Microsoft borrows from adjacent domains in the privacy space, which is this hub and spoke model. In the hub, we have 3 groups within Microsoft that support the sort of underlying work around responsible AI. The Office of Responsible AI, which is where I sit, is sort of in charge of the excellence in policy, governance, and enablement in the organization. We develop the responsible AI standard and guidance documents that provide the rules essentially for developing and using AI systems. Adjacent to us, we have the Ether group that is a group of researchers that provide cutting edge research and thought leadership on emerging AI systems and concerns. And then lastly, we have RAISE, which provides best of breed engineering systems and tools to support engineering teams as they're trying to comply with the rules that we set. So that's the hub. And the spokes of the hub are a pretty broad, robust network of responsible AI champions that are embedded across various divisions at Microsoft, and they help support, galvanize the understanding around responsible AI and compliance towards the standard across various divisions at Microsoft. So I've alluded to this concept of the responsible AI standard a couple of times, so I want to quickly touch on this. This is version 2 of our standard that was published in June of 2022. And it is essentially our internal playbook for responsible AI. It shapes the way in which we create AI systems and guides how we design, build, and test them. And drafting this standard has been a multi-year and cross-company effort. There was a version 1 that helped us understand how engineering teams were perceiving the first version that we put out, and learnings from that helped create version 2. And to provide you all with a sense for how this responsible AI standard is structured, This diagram is aimed to do that. So we start off with our principles, which are the enduring values that guide our responsible AI work. Underneath each principle, there are a set of goals. So these are the outcomes that we need to secure. And under each goal, there are a set of requirements that are the steps that teams must take to secure those goals. And where available, there are tools and practices that help teams meet the requirements. And now, just to give you a glance at what the standard looks like, there are, of course, 6 principles, as I mentioned before, 17 goals that sort of correspond to each of those principles. I know there was a mention of ethical impact assessment that falls under our accountability principle. And we have a template and guidance and training available around impact assessments for our internal teams. And there's many more, and I can put a link to the Responsible AI standard as well as our impact assessment in the chat for anyone who is curious to learn more. So that is just sort of a peek into Microsoft's approach to responsible AI, but it's important that we look beyond Microsoft as well. Despite the investments we have made and continue to make in responsible AI, we still have a lot of work ahead of us, a lot of work. And it's important to note that while we have both private sector and public sector players that share our commitments, not all players in the AI space will invest in a measured and principled approach to secure the benefits of AI. So I want to quickly touch on regulation and the need for developing countries to be involved. So as the acceleration of AI continues to grow, there's a critical role that effectively crafted and proportional regulation will need to play. This visualization is meant to show both enacted regulation, which is shown in this light blue shade, and proposed regulation that's gaining momentum, which is shown in this navy shade. And there may be some that we're missing around the world, but this is sort of our current understanding of the current state. Overall, regulatory momentum is growing around the world with varying degrees of complexity and focus. In the EU AI Act takes on a horizontal AI regulatory approach, while laws passed in the US and China have been either sector-specific or system-specific. And one of the things that strikes me about this visualization is not only the countries that are highlighted, but as somebody who was born in Ethiopia and raised all over East Africa, I tend to focus on the countries that are not highlighted. The various fora where global AI making policies are discussed need to be inclusive of developing countries. Although most AI systems are being developed in advanced economies, their far-reaching impacts are felt in developing ones as well, both the good and the bad. AI technologies hold great promise to shape our collective global future, and a cohesive global regulatory framework that is inclusive of the needs of the perspectives of developing countries will be a critical piece to realizing the benefits of AI while mitigating the risks. And I'll end with this last note, especially knowing that our friends from UNESCO are here. The recommendations on the ethics of AI is a tremendous achievement in trying to provide sort of that cohesive global framework around how we practice ethics around AI. And in support of that, Microsoft has joined the Business Council on Ibero-America, co-chairing it with Telefonica, that has been organized by UNESCO. And we will be starting this work in 2023. The announcement was made just a few weeks ago. So we look forward to collaborating with you all on that. And with that, I will wrap it up in the interest of time and say thank you again for having me here and being able to share this, this perspective with you all.
Thank you very, very much, Mrs. Tesfaye, for that very interesting presentation, and particularly for your last point about the urgent need to have a real and deep involvement of the developing countries in coming up with these frameworks for the governance of artificial intelligence. Our next speaker is Mrs. Ravit Doutan, who is the director of the Collaborative Artificial Intelligence Responsibility Lab at the University of Pittsburgh. Her research focuses on how to help companies, investors, and public administrators to engage with artificial intelligence and data more responsibly. Mrs. Dutton, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Let me share my screen and get started. Okay. I believe my screen is now shared. So today I wanted to talk about the impact of AI on developing countries in particular. And the question I'm going to be focusing on is why AI may impact developing countries more negatively than other countries, and what can those countries do about that? So quickly to introduce myself, to add to the introduction, I am a tech ethicist. I specialize in data and AI ethics. I do advising, speaking, and research. My PhD is in philosophy. I do most of my communication over LinkedIn, so feel free to follow me. And I post free resources on AI ethics on my website, so feel free to check it out. With that, let me get started. So there are 2 points I want to make today. The first one is that developing countries are vulnerable to excessive AI harms that may be different from the harms that developed countries are facing. Here's just 3 examples of that. First is about where the data is coming from. So the data that AI systems are trained on greatly impact or even determine how those AI systems are going to function. Recently, a study came out showing that most of the data that AI systems are trained on is coming from the West, and especially from the US. So this image on this slide represents the frequency of data set usage. So as you can see, it's distorted. The US is huge, Africa is nothing. That's really concerning. That impacts what AI systems can see and what they can do. So it means that very, very likely, most AI systems are just not as equipped to represent and serve the needs of people in developing countries. So that's one example of different impact on developing countries. Another impact of developing countries has to do with the fact that those AI systems, they are tools that are designed for certain contexts, and they are typically designed for Western contexts. As any other tool, when you take a tool that's designed for one context and try to implement it in another, sometimes it will be a bad fit to the extent that it would be harmful. Here's an example. Some of you might have heard that in Myanmar, there was a genocide performed against Muslims. Facebook was accused of inciting that genocide, and some even described it as becoming a tool for a genocide. The reason for that accusation, well, now they're called Meta, but the reason for that accusation is that government officials in Myanmar used Facebook to create fake accounts and disperse fake news and incite hate against Muslims. Now, the problem is that in Myanmar, the media is controlled by the state. So people don't really have independent means to verify the claims that you're seeing on Facebook, which is why in the context of a country that doesn't have free press, such as Myanmar, Facebook can actually be much, much more dangerous when it comes to disinformation and the bad consequences that result from it. This is an example from a paper by Arun. There's a link here. When this deck is up, I encourage you to read this paper. Okay, third reason why developing countries are vulnerable in other ways, and perhaps more ways. So this is, we've mentioned AI ethics principles. Both previous speakers have mentioned them. It's because they've been there's been an explosion of those principles since 2016. And they're good and they're helpful, but also most of them are formulated in the West, specifically US and Europe, have been formulating many of those principles. And the problem with that is that when we develop principles for ethics, it is going to reflect our cultural values, the cultural values of the ones who formulate them. Since we don't have a lot of participation or not enough participation from developing countries, it's not really a surprise if those principles don't fully represent the value systems of countries that are not in the Western part of the world. So here's one example. Again, this is from a paper by Carmen and Rosman. The link is here. I highly recommend reading it. But the point is, we should think about those principles in cultural context. Think about the principle of autonomy, which has been influential in AI ethics. Here is a formulation of the principle from a paper by Floridi and colleagues. Principle of autonomy says in this formulation, individuals have a right to make decisions for themselves about the treatment that they do or not receive. A criticism says, yeah, this principle of autonomy is very individualized. It is about individuals. And as such, it conflicts with communitarian values in cultures such as African cultures, in which communitarian values are emphasized. So we really need participation from developing countries in the formulation of those principles and legislation, as the previous talk brought up. Otherwise, the risk is some kind of moral colonialism where we take principles of ethics that have been formulated in the West, but trying to implement them to other contexts. The fourth and last example that I will give for how AI may harm developing countries, more or like impact them more negatively, is in the way that the AI industry seems to be exploiting the developing countries. These examples are from this article linked here by Patricia Gistosa, and I again recommend this highly. So Patricia points out 4 ways that the AI industry is exploiting developing countries. One is by annotators. So annotators are the ones who tag information. So often what we need to train AI system is to have examples. So the AI system could learn the difference between an image of a cat and an image of a dog. If it has many images of cats and dogs and each one is tagged, which one is a cat, which one is a dog. A human does those annotations. Which humans, how were they treated? How much are they getting paid? A lot of it is happening in developing countries with very low wages. So it is, yet another profession in which we're seeing that kind of exploitation, kind of low-paying work, undercompensating them. So that's one example. Another example is with content moderation. Content moderation is when, for example, in social media, some content we don't want it on the social media, but someone needs to be there, behind the curtain and indicating which content is inappropriate. This work is very, very difficult because you're watching disturbing content all day long. So it can be emotionally scarring, psychologically scarring. A lot of this work is done in developing countries, and ironically, not even serving their own countries, but rather going over content that is really coming from, it's going to be shown and is about Western countries. So we have people watching this traumatizing content for very, very low pay, without unions, without wellness breaks. This is a toll that they're taking on. A third way that the AI industry is using developing countries is by experiments. So they need to test out the technology before they unleash it on, a big audience. And in developing countries, often privacy laws or AI ethics laws are more lax. So that gives companies opportunities to come in and experiment on the local population. But because those technologies are at the experimental stage, they can and they do and they have harm people. And so we're seeing populations in developing countries being harmed by those experiments. And the last way is by mining, which is really familiar. It's not new, but we think of AI, we think high-tech technology, but actually these are machines. Machines need resources. These resources, they need to be mined. So cobalt and lithium, which are needed for those batteries, for those computers, yeah, they're mined, and it's often done by children in global south countries. So this was my first point. This is all to say that AI does not impact all countries the same, and there are specific harms that we need to pay attention to when we think of developing countries. So this part of the talk is really a call to think of how AI may impact those regions differently in perhaps worse ways, and understanding those impacts so that we can address them. Which brings me to my next point. What can developing countries do to mitigate those harms that could affect them? So there are 4 things that I'm gonna briefly propose, and if anyone wants to talk about them further, please do reach out to me. So one thing I recommend is national regulation, especially now as we're seeing the legislative efforts in other countries. This was, I think, the same point as the previous speaker, right, with the map. Like, we're seeing some regions not even having proposed legislation, and it's gonna matter because AI is a global technology. Rules about it in the EU are just going to affect people in other countries, especially if they don't have their own rules to negate potential damages. So countries need to move forward regulation about AI. The second point that I want to mention is more broad national AI strategies. So it's not only about coming up with laws, it's also about how can the government build itself up, right? How AI is a technology that can really, it can boost ecosystem, it can boost companies. So developing countries can harness that to decrease the gap between them and other countries. And they should do that with a focus on AI ethics. So that's the second point. The third point is increasing their participation in AI ethics conversations, which goes with the points that we've already mentioned. We don't want AI ethics principles to only represent certain countries when they do have a global effect. So that's the third point. And the fourth point that I'm going to linger on slightly more is creating financial incentives for responsible AI development. Here's a way that some people think of AI ethics. Some people think of it as kind of a problem for the engineer at the end of the line. So they might imagine some engineer sitting in some back office, and it's as if we can point to that engineer and just say, hey, you back there, implement some fairness tools. But the reality is more complicated because those engineers are embedded within companies. Those companies have resources, they have priorities. People who work in them are limited in their ability to do things if they're not prioritized by the organization, if they're not supported. So the you need to think about is not the engineer at the end, in some imaginary back room, but rather the tech company as a whole. And also not exactly the tech company itself, because the tech company is also embedded in an ecosystem. And a part of the ecosystem that I personally focus on is the financial ecosystem. There are investors, there are insurance companies, there are procurement teams. All of those actors are connected to the tech company and shape the incentives. So a really helpful unit to focus on is this ecosystem of tech companies and those who support them financially. So when we create principles and tools and frameworks, they need to also cover those financial actors who are able to do due diligence and reward companies financially or not, and also support them as they develop. And when I think about what companies can do, what countries can do. Countries can help with that. Countries can help shape the entire ecosystem to encourage the different actors to take responsibility to create those incentives for the tech companies, to enable the engineers and anyone else in those companies to build AI systems that are better for us.
May I ask you to wrap up in a minute or
Yeah.
so, because we have another presentation and we would like to have.
This is my last slide, so this is perfect timing. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very, very much. I
Yeah.
think it was a very interesting presentation. We now have our final presenter, who is Amal Sekrouini, who is Executive President of Artificial Intelligence Movement in the Moroccan International Center for Artificial Intelligence. She was supposed to connect, but she was not able to do so. But she has sent us a video with her presentation, so we're going to play it, and then we will move on to the question and answer session. Can we play the video, colleagues? While the video is set up, I would like to remind the online participants that if they have questions for the panelists, they can write the questions in the chat section of the link, and they will be forwarded to our panelists.
Hello everyone. My name is Professor Amal El-Fala Segrachny, and I will have the pleasure to talk to you today about artificial intelligence and human rights with a focus on what we do at the International Center of Artificial Intelligence of Morocco AI movement. I would like to start by an Albert Einstein citation. He says science is a powerful tool. How it is used depends on the man, not the tool. The same thing goes for AI. As a disruptive technology, AI has a profound impact on every aspect of life, including human rights. For today's presentation, we will discuss the impact of AI on human rights and what we do at AI Movement contributing to SDGs in Africa. First, let us start with discussing the impact of AI on human rights. AI's impact on human rights and dignity can have impact of different aspects, including algorithmic subordination, manipulation and nudges, privacy and data protection, bias and discrimination, language inclusion, cognitive rights, and value alignment. Let us discuss these points in details. First, algorithmic subordination is when we go from a system that decides on its own to a system that decides on its own and on your behalf. In a traditional setting, a lot of factors can actually govern, or, to a certain extent, affect the decision that will be taken. These include social standards, regulation authority, or economic considerations. But in the case where AI and data algorithm are in charge, things can get complicated. For example, in the case where a drone decides autonomously to launch a missile, who is responsible for the decision? In a lot of cases, including aerospace, we talk about levels of autonomy instead of straight autonomy, where a human is always in the loop in different levels. Taking into considerations that less than 0.05% of the world's population can code or build algorithms, the question is to whom we entrust this governance. The second impact that AI can have is through manipulation and nudges. Indeed, it is well known in behavioral science that individuals can be influenced with indirect suggestions in a way that even direct instruction, legislation, or enforcement can't. AI can boost classical techniques to be more powerful by aggregating information about individual to influence in a targeted and more powerful way. These techniques can be extremely effective. In the past, politicians, such as David Cameron and Barack Obama, have used nudges to push citizens to make the right decisions. Let's take, for example, humanoid robots that look very empathic by pulling a childlike face with sometimes very realistic facial expression. These robots are already a part of some households around the world. The interaction with these robots generate attachment and empathy on the side of their human users, which can be a real danger on human communication. The German experience with the robot that or who said, "No, please don't go away. I'm afraid it's never going to be daylight again." After interaction with the robot, 13 out of 43 participants in the experiment were sensitive to the robot's request and could not turn off the robot. Artificial intelligence is also raising serious concerns about privacy and data protection. AI systems are designed to collect and analyze large amounts of data, which can be used to make decisions about individuals without their knowledge or consent.
So that we can move to the question and answer session, please. I think the presentation will be available on the website of the CSTD of this session. So anyone interested in finding out the details of what our presenter had to communicate on the question of AI and human rights will be available on the website. I think it's more useful if we now open the floor for interaction with the participants here and also anyone online who wants to ask questions. So the floor is open for interventions from the floor. Yes, I cannot see your nameplate, but please, the lady at the back.
Reading Alev Mine of the One Goal Initiative. This would be a question for Ravit Dotan. You mentioned the difference between the a cultural norm of individuality versus community decision making. How do you see this pan out when it comes to designing an AI? Would this mean that the AI would have to work in a different manner for each person in a way, or each group? And how do we know if in the group everybody agrees with that norm, which turns the thing around, because then we have to go back to the individual decision. How do you see this happening?
Ms. Dutton, are you still connected?
Vicky, yeah, I can't unmute myself. Thank you for this question. Yeah, so how does autonomy look like in the communitarian version? I don't want to speak to it myself because I'm not a part of those communitarian cultures, so it would be best to have them. So instead, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to give an example of how people approach this question in the context of bioethics, because that is a place where we do have progress on this. In bioethics, that's where this autonomy principle is coming from. And there the question is, who gets to make the decision? Is it the individual or is it the broader community? And in response to those criticisms, the World Health Organization, they did different consent processes for people who participate in certain kind of medical procedures, experiments. So whereas in the West, people have to, it's an individualized process of consent. That's how autonomy manifests in those things. For some communitarian societies, there are different consent processes that take into account not only the person who is going to go, undergo the procedure, but also their other decision makers that are important, family, people who are like authority figures in the tribe. So that's how they did it in the context of bioethics. I think it's not for me to say how to do it in the context of AI, but this is just to give an example of how it could look like.
Thank you. I think we have another question from an NGO here in the room.
Thank you very much. My name is Anita, and I'm from IT for Change. I wish to make a comment in relation to the theme of this session, which is to consider the different multifaceted implications of AI. I thought that since the AI regime is so closely tied to data governance and the data regime, it might be useful also to tease out the implications of AI value for equity in the world, and to that extent, to look at fairness principles in AI as also being implicated in the ways in which the benefits of data and AI are distributed in the world. What I'm talking about is AI value chains, and I think we haven't heard very much today from all the panelists on that.
But I'm sure we're going to.
I'm very happy to answer this question because recently I gave a talk on battle of control for data. And you're right, it's integral to AI. And I'd just like to give you this example that I've been working on for ITU AI for Good series on the use of indigenous or Aboriginal content on generative AI. Because when people use things like ChatGPT, they forget that Aboriginal content is more than data content. It has spiritual value, it has cultural value, it has community value, it's not individualistic, it's very different from the Western concept. So when you suck into ChatGPT, what does it become when it goes out on the other side? So I like to question people when they do that. So in short, I do have a couple of programs that I'm currently organizing with ITU for AI for Good to look at this concept from the Aboriginal, Australian Aboriginal perspective, the UN Convention for Protection of Cultural Heritage, which includes data. We also look at from the perspective of other indigenous cultures like the Maori, New Zealand, Hawaiian, the American Indians, and African, obviously. So I think that's an important discussion. I think that the Commission needs to look at for the Global South. It's an area for debate. I know as an IP lawyer, most of those Aboriginal content are not protected under copyright law. I know they are under conventions, but we need to have that debate because the next frontier is quite different. Generative AI has changed the apple cart and it's become a serious issue that needs to be discussed, because just because we can suck content for training doesn't mean we should be allowed to, because it has special significance to special community groups around the world. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. Any more questions from the floor or from the chat? Yes, Professor Cho.
And as we know, AI systems are very much trained on data. And there was an excellent way doing this kind of how Microsoft tried to comply to some ethics. How does she vision the linkage between data governance and governance in AI, the ethics of AI? This question could also be forwarded to Dotan Rawit, of course. So,
yes, Mrs. Tesfaye, are you still with us? I'm not sure that Mrs. Tesfaye is connected, but perhaps some of our panelists.
Hi, sorry, I can't unmute myself, so I have to wait for the folks who can unmute me. I apologize, if you could kindly repeat your question.
between AI governance and principles of data governance, because AI systems are trained on data, or many systems are trained on data, and what kind of data, and so the AI ethics, how it is linked to data governance.
Okay, thank you so much. I can provide you with sort of the thinking that Microsoft takes for this approach. The responsible AI standard that I had mentioned in my presentation, and there's a link to it in the chat now for those who might want to take a look. You will see that it actually builds on existing concepts. It doesn't try to differentiate or segment out like new governance processes specifically for AI. So under our accountability principle, there's a goal around data management and governance, which borrows heavily from sort of existing concepts around data governance. Are you using the appropriate data for the problem that you're trying to solve? There are concepts around privacy and security as well that build on the Microsoft privacy policy, as well as the security standard that had been in operation for many years. So the idea is not to create something brand new for the purpose of AI, but to sort of build upon existing standards, governance practices for data, which is the underlying sort of lifeline for AI anyway. I'll pause there and pass it on to any of my other panelists who'd like to respond to that question.
Thank you, Mr. Sfire. Dotan, Mrs. Dotan, would you like to comment?
Yes, thank you for this question. Yeah, I really like what was just said. I think if we're gonna make governance of AI technologies, which include data technologies in my mind, work, it needs to build on the existing processes that we have. That's, you know, to integrate it naturally into the governance of the organization. I would add to that because of the special nature of this technology, we would need to add customized processes. So that includes processes around data. So I'll just emphasize that because I think that's what the question was about. It impacts what kind of people in the organization we are focusing on. So if we're thinking of data, it's not only the engineers themselves. We need to think more broadly of the people who handle data as well. And I think sometimes people forget that and focus only on the algorithm development. But actually, there are a lot of people who work around data as well. And I know that a lot of them are aware of privacy issues. We can build on that. And when they think of privacy issues, also add fairness issues, which are key when it comes to data technologies. So I would say to take the governance of data one step further, I would build on whatever processes the organization has for privacy and think about how to add processes for ensuring fairness when it comes to all the professionals who are dealing with the data, not just the engineers, but really anyone. So that's what I would add.
Thank you very much for that comment. I think we need to wrap up, but before we do that, perhaps I would like to give a minute or two to our panelists for any final comments that they would like to make. Maybe we can start with UNESCO, Cedric, and then.
Well, thank you. That was an exciting discussion. Of course, it raised many questions we would have loved to continue to discuss, including with the panelists, with the participants here. I wanted to actually come back also on the data part, which is of course crucial, and UNESCO has developed some guidelines there. They're also about data empowerment, data inclusion. I could have spoken a little bit more about the number of zettabytes increasing in data over the years and what we're looking forward to or not with all the 25 billion connected devices coming up in 23 already, but now there's also for developing countries, of course, the question of data access in terms of connectivity and availability of digital literacy, of data ownership. It's a huge topic, but we have guidelines in this domain too. So I'd be happy to discuss it in another context. I think the human rights and ethical dimensions we discussed today were of utmost importance. And I think Mr. Wong and Mr. Wang, but also Ms. Tesfaye and Ms. Ravid could really contribute to that. And I think there is a global consensus on the absolute need to move forward. And some mentioned also the work we have just been doing on digital platforms last month, where we are working towards guidelines for regulating digital platforms for the public, for information as a public good. So UNESCO stands for freedom of expression. So it is not to cut freedom of expression at all, but there is a huge need for this regulation too. And it is asked by governments as well as companies, as civil society. So on that, I hope we continue to work together, including with the private sector, but also with all the other key actors. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Cedric. I would like now to invite Mr. Wang from China to give us his final comments very briefly, please, because we really need to prepare the room for the next session.
Okay, thank you. Just to wrap up, we know that AI trustworthy or responsible AI development is a very challenging task. So I think every stakeholders, especially enterprises and the third parties, should devote themselves in implementing all those technologies related to ensure AI is for good. That's a challenging work, and it has a lot of difficult questions remains to be solved. So let's work together towards a better AI. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we all agree with those final comments. And now to close this session, I would like to give the floor to Anthony Wong for his final thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you to the Commission and members for inviting us to this participation. I think today we just heard a snapshot of the positive sides of AI as well as the many negatives. I think we're not even touching the bottom or the top of the iceberg. There are many issues that we need to consider. I think the role for the Commission moving forward with the member states, it's important that we need to look at this discussion for the world, whether it's amplification of disinformation or fake news with generative AI, or is the protection of people's data from many perspectives that has been used by generative AI. We even need to start a discussion with the UN sister WIPO about not just from the lawyer's perspective of WIPO, but from the world community, including Global South, about why ownership of certain things is important to the Global South. So I think it's an important discussion to do it now, because the next discussion will be about who owns data or who owns the things created by generative AI. And it's important that if we're going to have technology or global diffusion of technology to the Global South, the Global South needs to be part of that discussion. So from the IFIP perspective, we have 4,000 technologies, industry, and people like me who's got legal and IT. We're happy to contribute and help the Commission in that effort. We have 500,000 members across 5 continents from our member societies, even one based in Switzerland. So we'll be happy to assist your work and the Commission's work on this, because I think this is probably one of the most important agenda that the world needs to deal with. So on that note, I don't want to keep you, I can go on for days, but we'll do that another time. But I'm very glad I'm here and able to contribute and using the knowledge and the ability and the reach of IFIP around the world. Happy to be part of that process. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I think those are very relevant final words for this session. Certainly, this is a conversation that we need to keep going on. So thank you everyone for your participation. To our online participants, just a reminder that all the presentations will be available on the website of the CSTD. And please stay for the next session, during which I'm sure that many of these issues will come up again, since we're going to be discussing on the World Summit on the Information Society outcomes and their implementation. Thank you very much.